limitless. That's Life Unlimited.
We said we'd never break the 3-second rule. Never do that. And never become a minivan mom.
Hey, Chris.
As parents, we say never a lot, but never happens. So when you say you'd never leave your child in a hot car, know it can happen. Before you leave the car, always stop, look, lock.
I'm Josh Robin. Here's your Spectrum News in 90. The face-off, months in the making. We're hours away now from the first and only vice presidential debate of 2024. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance will meet on the stage in New York City. CBS is hosting with moderators Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan, both campaigns hoping for a breakout night. And you can watch the debate here starting at 8:45 Eastern tonight. A senior official in the White House says that Iran is preparing a ballistic missile strike against Israel after the Israeli military began a ground incursion of Lebanon. The U.S. is helping Israel prepare defensive measures against the potential missile attacks. Israel has stepped up its strikes on Iranian-backed groups, including Hezbollah, in recent days, killing that group's commander on Friday. Hundreds of people in western North Carolina are waiting for supplies of water and food as the region continues its recovery after historic flooding from Helene last week. Emergency workers from local, state, and federal agencies are working nonstop to reach mountain communities cut off after floods washed out roadways. President Joe Biden is expected to survey the damage tomorrow. And 45,000 port workers are on strike, demanding better wages and job protections from automation. The union members walked off the job at ports from Maine to Texas. Those are your headlines. Now a look at your Weather on the Ones forecast.
Good Tuesday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Ramel Carpenter. High pressure dominated the weather pattern across the Central Plains, allowing for drive time and sunshine, but our temperatures start to warm back up as we head into Wednesday. We're going to climb back into the low 80s in Kansas City, low 90s in Denver, Colorado. Definitely feeling like summer. And then especially out west in California, upper 80s to the low 90s from San Francisco all the way down into Los Angeles. So find ways to stay cool. Meanwhile, we're still monitoring the tropics. Across the Atlantic Basin, we have Kirk. I'll have an update on his latest track coming up in 10 minutes.
Good afternoon. I'm Josh Robin. This is a breaking news report here on Spectrum News. It is 1 o'clock on the East Coast and just after 8 p.m. in Tel Aviv. That's the live pictures you're seeing now, where there has been a barrage of rockets that have been sent from Iran to Israel. It is unclear if any have landed. It appears that a number have been intercepted over the Middle East. The United States is closely watching this because there is concern that this could spark a wider war, including retaliation against Iran. It comes amid almost a year of conflict in Israel with the October 7th invasion by Hamas into Israel, and then retaliation by Israel, and then more recently the attack that Israel has launched on southern Lebanon that took out on Friday the leader of that Iranian-backed group, which is a designated U.S. terrorist group. Again, you're looking at live pictures over Tel Aviv. It is the evening there shortly after 8 o'clock, and a barrage of missiles have been sent from Iran, which backs both Hezbollah and Hamas, against Israel, which of course is backed by the United States, including an increasing amount of arms there. We have team coverage here to talk about what this means and what this means for you. A lot at stake here. We're going to start with Daniel Grimes in Washington. Daniel, a lot of this is the fog of war here, and we don't have too much information because literally the air raid sirens are going off across Israel right now. But what can you tell us?
Yeah, Josh, as you noted, Israel is under attack from Iran.
Now, we expected that this could have happened this summer when you had the death of Ismail Haniyeh. He, of course, was the leader of Hamas. We expected Iran to attack then, and they didn't do an attack then. Of course, there was an attack in the spring, in April, where we saw Iran launch hundreds, I think more than 300 missiles, air missiles, and they attacked Israel back in the spring. Of course, intercepted along with some other allies, much of those, and that appears is what happened here as well. A lot of those, as you noted, we don't know if any of them hit the ground just yet, but we do know that there were a series of attacks from Iran against Israel right now. It's happening as we speak, and it seems like a lot of those have been intercepted as well. But all of this just an escalation of tensions in the Middle East, and the Biden administration has been warning against it. I mean, just this weekend, you had the Secretary of Defense saying, hey, we want to try to avoid any attack from Iran. We want to try to make sure that Israel does not have a ground offensive into Lebanon. Well, both those things have happened. I mean, that the Israel just launched the ground offensive earlier this morning, our time, and now we're seeing Iran attack Israel. So the escalation that the Biden administration has been warning against is happening. Of course, a senior administration officials said today that if Iran does attack Israel, there will be severe consequences. So, Josh, we're going to have to wait and see what those consequences are.
Yeah, let me bring in Robert Satloff. He's the executive director of the Washington Institute and a longtime scholar of the Middle East. Dr. Satloff, thanks so much for being here. Daniel was just talking about what the United States' involvement might be. They're monitoring this, obviously, as closely as you can. What do you anticipate the questions that are going on within the White House are right now?
Officials, if there's anything more we need to do.
All right. Dr. Satloff, we'll have to get back to you in a second. We have a little bit of audio issues. I'm going to pose that question to my colleague Bob Hart, Spectrum News political director. What are the questions that you think Joe Biden is asking of his top defense officials right now?
Well, I think the first thing that everyone wants to see is, can Israel's, Iron Dome protect it from these attacks? We saw an earlier attack from Iran basically rebuffed by the Israeli air defense. So I think that obviously this is aggression, but if there's casualties, I think that will be the big X factor about whether there'll be escalation, and that's what I think we're going to have to wait and see. Unfortunately, will there be casualties on the ground?
Initially, earlier today, the United States, and in recent days, the United States has moved U.S. troops closer and closer in that region, augmenting it. We might be getting ahead of ourselves, but do we feel that a strike on Iran is a possibility?
I would say that's like DEFCON 2, DEFCON 1. If that happens, then you're going to have a whole regional conflict. Should something like that would be a major, major escalation. We started, as you noted, last October with something going on, between the Palestinians in Gaza and Israel. Now you have expansion with the fight against Hezbollah, and the first time in I'd say at least 15 years, Israeli troops crossing the border. So we're getting to a whole certain level that we haven't seen in a while, but should any kind of American strike go against Iran, that would be a whole other level that we haven't seen in quite some time.
Alex, this is obviously a breaking news situation, and lives are at stake in many different countries. Some people do say, however, that amid all of that tragedy, something positive can come out of this, which is that, as the Prime Minister of Israel brought up in his speech to the Iranian people yesterday, that the regime that controls Iran and that's not exactly seen as popular there could become undone. And similar with the stranglehold that Hezbollah had over the Lebanese people. Do you have any thoughts about whether that might be a conversation that's going on in the White House now, that there be some massive changes within the Middle East amid all of these wars?
I think the really difficult thing to balance in all of this, Josh, is that we are sitting here on October 1st. We are just a few weeks away from the presidential election, and certainly that has to be top of mind. I think it's very startling to see the images coming out of that region of the world today, although not entirely unexpected. In fact, I've read reports that both the vice president and the president were having meetings just earlier this morning to get the latest information. I think what's going to most likely happen is that we will not see any bold or immediate actions taken right at the moment. We know that President Biden has been working for many, many weeks now on a ceasefire deal. It has seemed in recent days that any chance of brokering some sort of deal seems to be diminishing. I think that probably what we are likely to see here, I've covered us being on the brink of these situations so many times, and it seems to me what is more likely to happen is more of this slow boil, especially with the election so very close here in the U.S.
Alex, thank you. Let me turn back to Robert Satloff. Dr. Satloff, I think that you can hear me now, and I appreciate you being here. Obviously, this is a breaking news situation. We don't know how many missiles have been launched from Iran. We can safely say it's dozens. We don't know if any have landed. What do you think the conversation is like right now within the White House? What are they looking to do when it comes to American involvement in all of this?
So I think the American priority is to try to recreate the coalition that on April 13th helped prevent a previous Iranian barrage of rockets, missiles, and drones from inflicting any damage inside, any significant damage inside Israel. At that time, the U.S. Central Command orchestrated a very effective counter missile and counter drone effort that included Arabs and European partners along with the Israelis, and it stopped that Iranian barrage from having any serious impact. We are doing that again right now. And that is the meaning behind the president's and the Secretary of Defense's words, that we are there to support and help protect alongside the Israelis themselves. So that's what they're focused on now. After we see the outcome of the current missile attack, then there will be discussion about what, if anything, the Israelis decide to do in retaliation. I do expect that the Israelis, especially given what's been going on in Lebanon and their success on the ground and with their other operations against Hezbollah, I do expect that the Israelis will retaliate before too long against what is happening today.
Okay, Dr. Satloff, hang on for 1 second. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Bob Hart. Alex brought up the domestic issue of the Biden administration right now. Obviously, there is concern about Israel and American interests in the Middle East. There's also concern about an election, frankly. Donald Trump has been all over social media talking about how the world is on fire and Joe Biden is to blame and Kamala Harris is inept. What would the Harris team say to that, and what should Americans take from this?
So, I mean, the almost the blanket thing we've been hearing from candidate Trump, if you look at Ukraine, if you look at the Middle East, if I were president, this never would have happened. He doesn't necessarily go into details, but that's one of his talking points. I think what you'll hear from the vice president and from the president is exactly what Biden said this afternoon, which is we're monitoring this, we're on this, but it is important. Americans don't love war, so I don't think they hear warmongering from the president or the vice president, but they need to show that they're on top of this, that they're handling it, and that they're also communicating with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Daniel, let's turn over to you in Washington. Any new information just in these moments about what has happened so far? What actually is happening in Tel Aviv? Because the image that I'm seeing now is fairly quiet. Do we have any indication in the fog of this of any more missiles coming in from Iran?
Yeah, so, I mean, as of right now, I'm just seeing that there were the barrage of attacks. I know the President Biden assembled Vice President Kamala Harris and his team to discuss the U.S. response. Of course, the president has been reiterating that the U.S. plans to support its ally, Israel, if an attack like this should occur. Now, in terms of just the latest, I've been researching and trying to fresh to see if anything's happening. As of right now, I can't tell if there are still attacks, but we do know, as you noted, Josh, at least probably, I think it's safe to say up to 100 of attacks. There were a barrage of attacks from Iran to Israel that we just saw unfold this past hour, and so I'm not sure if it's quiet right now. I've not been able to see based on my refreshing here, but and again, I'm not even able to sure to know if any of them actually hit the ground, but looks like most of them were intercepted. So looks like most of that kind of Iron Dome that the U.S. and its allies were able to put in force to help defend Israel, it looks like it's been effective just as it was back in the spring, Josh.
Robert, let me turn to you again. Look, we're in a situation where it's very fluid right now. The pictures that we're looking at seem that things are calm. There are reports of fragments that have fallen. Dozens of missiles have been fired, but it looks like they have been, at least so far, intercepted from what we can tell. You brought up back in April, 350 rockets and drones were sent by Iran. At that time, it was shot down it was helped by Israel, by the United States, by the UK. There was clandestine reports of Jordan being involved, and President Biden said to Prime Minister Netanyahu, time, take the win, don't retaliate. Do you see that kind of happening again? Biden has been so interested in not escalating the situation, and yet it's continued to go on. Do you think that might be repeated again if this is it?
So I think it's highly unlikely that the Israelis are going to not respond. The last thing that Israel wants is to normalize the idea that Iran, hundreds of kilometers away, can just lob ballistic missiles at your country and pay no direct price for it. So I think the idea that of no Israeli retaliation is highly unlikely, especially at a moment when Israel is so effectively taking out Iran's foremost proxy in the region, which is Hezbollah, the Lebanese terrorist group. The issue really is how large an Israeli retaliation. The last retaliation was significant, but as much symbolic as it was effective. It was meant to show the Iranians that the Israelis have the wherewithal to overcome Iranian missile defenses and target some of its most sensitive sites. But it didn't actually try to take out large numbers of those sites. Now I think there may be an attraction for Israel to cause some significant damage inside Iran. Iran clearly did not learn the lesson the first time, and so now the Israelis may feel as though they have the legitimacy, given Iran's attack, they have the legitimacy to respond in a far greater fashion than they did in April.
What happens then? If you attack Iran, could this spark a war that Russia gets involved in, that China gets involved in?
I think what we have seen over the last several days since the killing of Nasrallah is great reluctance on the part of Iran to get directly engaged, even though it's their proxy who was who was targeted here. Iran was embarrassed and needed to get engaged in order to maintain its control over all of its proxies in the region. This not a choice that the Iranians easily made to attack Israel, but yet it was a choice that they came to. And so there will be repercussions of this choice. I don't think that this is the opening salvo, the opening exchange of an ongoing broad Middle East conflict that will see repeated salvos from one side to the other, emptying out their arsenals of ballistic missiles. That is highly unlikely. Iran has an enormous amount to lose in that sort of exchange, which is precisely why they have historically wanted their battles to be fought by proxies rather than to be fought by themselves. This is an unusual event, but they will pay for it for going down the path of directly attacking Israel this way.
Just bringing people up to date a little bit as to where we are. Again, Iran has launched dozens of missiles at Israel amid this escalating Middle East war. According to the Times of Israel website, multiple impact sites have been reported of either shrapnel or rocket impacts in Tel Aviv, near the Dead Sea, in the south, and in the Sharon region. The Sharon region is just north of Tel Aviv. The Israeli version of the Red Cross says that there are no immediate reports of injuries. The head of it's called Magen David Adom, that's the Red Cross in Israel, says that hundreds of missiles have been fired, but no reports of injuries. Alex Cohen, let me turn over to you, just following in on what Dr. Salthoff was saying. I think people would feel, perhaps amid a lot of conflicting and fright from all of these reports, that the fact that Iran is not thought to want a wider war is somewhat calming, I would say. Your thoughts just on what he was saying?
Well, I agree with Dr. Satloff. I think we should all take a deep breath and not jump to the conclusions that this is somehow going to escalate immediately into World War III. It is important to note also we are on the cusp of the Jewish high holidays, and that it is likely part of the timing here as well. It will be very interesting to see here what the next moves are. Iran has said that they will continue this sort of attack if there's any sort of retaliation. But as we all keep coming back to, I think the really key player in all of this is our country. And I think to get a better sense of what potentially could be happening. Also interesting to note, tonight is the one and only vice presidential debate, and I think this will give, once again, the American public a very good opportunity to see some very stark differences, not only between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, but between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. We've heard from the Trump-Vance ticket very much a strong support for Israel. I don't think you will hear anything different from that tonight. I think the more challenging task will fall upon Tim Walz, who will have to not only reassure the American public that they're in no imminent danger, but also walk that line between showing support for Israel, but also bearing in mind there are huge swaths of this country very deeply concerned about other populations and the impact that Israel and their leadership has had on them. It will be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, definitely. Some news from CNN here that Iran says that it launched these attacks in response, not surprisingly, excuse me, for the killing of the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and others, according to Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency. In response to the martyrdom, we targeted the heart of the occupied territories, it said, and if the Zionist regime reacts to Iran's operations, it will face crushing attacks, also according to the news agency. Not surprising that. Bob, let's turn to your reaction to what Alex was just saying. You know, domestic politics and international affairs are colliding. We have what's probably going to be the only VP debate tonight, and additionally, it might be the last debate period before the election. Voting is already underway.
Yeah, I think Alex is right, that this will be the first topic conversation and a debate where voters have been really focusing on migrants, on inflation, a lot, depending on what part of the country. And to Alex's point, you're hearing different kinds of concerns. I just want to go back to one other thing where we're talking about, hey, this, you know, let's take a deep breath. This won't necessarily be World War III. I would say a year ago, things were a lot more peaceful in the Middle East than they are now. And somewhere between peace and World War III is a violent mess, and that's where we are. You know, Israel had not been gone into Lebanon since 2006. They're there now. Same with Gaza. Things are definitely escalating, and even if we don't have Armageddon and you know, fire and brimstone, the situation is much, much more dire in the Middle East now than it was just 1 year ago.
Well, Dr. Satloff, can I bring you back in on this? Trump will say, look, I was there. I brought peace between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Morocco. And others might argue that you did that while neglecting the Palestinian cause, which is, to many people's minds, at the center of all of this conflict. There are other people who say that it can be done around the Palestinians. October 7th, prompted by an attack by Hamas from Gaza, a Palestinian group, obviously, supported by Iran. What's your sense as to what each side is going to say tonight? And frankly, as someone who's a nonpartisan expert on this, where do you think the truth lies in this?
The truth
Not so easy.
The truth is a topic that rarely is discussed here in Washington. But in terms of commitment to the Palestinian cause, is an interesting parallel. Actually, Donald Trump did have a Palestinian-Israeli peace plan issued in January 2000. It failed. It was rejected. In fact, both by the Israelis and the Palestinians, for very different reasons, but it failed. And then the United Arab Emirates basically pulled everyone's chestnuts out of the fire by making a strategic decision for peace with Israel that became the Abraham Accords. On his part, Joe Biden was the first president that goes back actually until Richard Nixon. No, actually, Lyndon Johnson was the first president since Lyndon Johnson that didn't have his own Middle East peace plan, his own plan to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This was because of an assessment that was made early in his administration that it wasn't ripe to pursue this sort of diplomacy. Interestingly, what happened on October 7th was, you cannot put it the blame of Donald Trump. You cannot put it the blame of Biden. As though either one of them was responsible for this. They had, one had made an effort. Perhaps it was not adequate. The other had made a decision that it was not appropriate, and it was not because of a lack of effort. It was because the situation on the ground was not ripe for diplomatic progress. What Hamas did was not because there was no diplomacy going on. What Hamas did was because Hamas wanted to change the entire nature of the conflict between Arabs and Israelis. It wanted to make Israelis feel vulnerable. It wanted to make individual Israelis feel vulnerable even in their homes. And it wanted to have Arabs around the Middle East rise up, open up multiple fronts against an Israel that was beginning to feel, with the Abraham Accords, with its peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, that perhaps real peace was at hand. And Hamas wanted desperately to change that equation. It wasn't Joe Biden's fault. It wasn't Donald Trump's fault. It was Hamas' responsibility.
Dr. Sadloff, thank you so much. Some more updates here, just again from the Times of Israel. Again, it's unclear if the barrage that had been launched from Iran earlier today, about half hour or so ago, about an hour ago, I should say, has ended. The scene, as you see here, over Tel Aviv is one of calmness. There aren't that kind of tracer lights that you normally see, the Iron Dome intercepting the missiles. And as far as injuries, only 2 injuries are reported across Israel in that Iranian missile attack. That's according to the Israeli version of the Red Cross, the Magen David Adom. 2 people lightly wounded by shrapnel in Tel Aviv, and others were treated for minor injuries after falling over while running for shelter and acute anxiety. Daniel Grimes, let me turn to you for the United States angle. I understand that the president and the vice president have been closely monitoring this. What can you say?
Yeah, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris met with the National Security Team, Josh, here in Washington to basically review the U.S. plan to support Israel. Of course, the president, since the October 7th attack, has reiterated the message that the U.S. will stand behind its ally Israel and defend Israel, and has also said, Israel has a right to defend itself, even amongst calls, a lot of calls here for the U.S. to do more, to maybe stop sending weapons over there, or to stop helping fund this war. And the president has always said, no, we are going to defend our ally. We're going to defend Israel. And that's why the president assembled the national security team here in Washington today to just further that message of how can the U.S. support now that Iran has launched this attack. And so I think, again, we're going to expect one thing. The senior administration officials said today that Iran can expect a severe consequence if they move forward with this attack. What that looks like remains to be seen, but we can expect the U.S. to coordinate an attack with Israel and respond to this, one. Number two, there are dozens more U.S. troops, thousands of more, I should say, heading to the region. And so the Pentagon announced that on Monday. That means there's about 43,000 U.S. troops there right now to help Israel defend itself and to help to make sure that the U.S. Any U.S. citizens over there remain safe. So I think, Josh, as you noted, this is still an ongoing situation. We're going to have to wait and see how the Biden administration responds to it. But we do know that the president and the vice president have been really vocal to say we're going to support our ally Israel.
Alex, let me turn to you. Again, it looks like things have calmed down there now. This barrage might have ended just because we're not seeing any more of it. What do you think Americans, as much as we can say that we speak with one voice, what do Americans broadly think about the Biden administration saying that we support Israel and yet it's time for all sides to come together for diplomacy?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a wide range of reactions on that one. Of course, for many Jewish Americans, they are very desperate to hear that kind of support for Israel, but that is not even true of all Jewish American voters. As we have seen over really the past year now since the October 7th attack, there are also plenty of Jewish American voters who stand in strong solidarity with the people of Palestine. And then, of course, I think much like the situation that has been happening in Ukraine now for more than a year, there are those Americans who recognize there might be a very serious situation overseas, but these are Americans who are wondering how they're going to afford their rent, how they're going to put food on the table for their kids. And in that sense, I think more than any kind of international strategy from either the Biden administration, Vice President and candidate Kamala Harris, and former President and current candidate Donald Trump,